The prosecutor's final words hung in the air of the silent courtroom, each one a perfectly polished stone dropped into a still pond. A signature, Your Honor. A contract. A clear and undeniable case of fraud. Sheikh Khalid Al-Jamil sat perfectly still at the defendant's table, his white thobe immaculate, his expression as unreadable as the desert horizon. The people around him, lawyers, advisors, family members, shifted in their seats, the rustle of expensive fabric sounding like dry leaves skittering across pavement. They were watching a dynasty begin to fracture. From the public gallery, Elena clutched the worn strap of her handbag, her knuckles white. She was invisible here, a ghost in a sensible blouse, the American household manager who was supposed to be efficient, quiet, and gone by now. Instead, she was a spectator at the immolation of the man who employed her, a man she was beginning to realize she knew not at all, and yet, somehow, better than anyone. Beside her, her 7-year-old daughter, Maya, sat with her legs swinging, her small feet in scuffed sneakers not quite reaching the floor. She wore a simple dark blue dress, a stark navy poppy in a field of beige and black suits. The prosecutor sat down, a portrait of smug satisfaction. Khalid's lead attorney shuffled his papers, the gesture of a man who knew he was beaten. He had nothing. The forged document was too good, the lie too well constructed. The judge looked over his spectacles at the defense. Anything further, counsel? Before the lawyer could officially surrender, Elena felt a surge of cold, clarifying panic. It was the same feeling she'd had the day she packed a single suitcase and left her old life behind, the day she decided being alone was better than being worthless. She stood up. A few heads turned, annoyed by the disruption. Her mouth opened, but no sound came out. What could she possibly say? But she didn't have to. Maya, seeing her mother's distress, scrambled onto the wooden bench. In the cavernous, silent room, her small voice was as clear as a bell. He didn't do it. A ripple of murmurs spread through the courtroom. The judge frowned, his gaze finding the small girl in the blue dress. Maya pointed a tiny, determined finger at Sheikh Khalid. He didn't do it. I have proof. The room erupted. The judge banged his gavel, his voice booming for order, but it was too late. In that single, chaotic moment, a 7-year-old girl, the daughter of the help, had just hijacked a multi-billion-dollar corporate trial. No one in that room, least of all Sheikh Khalid or Elena herself, understood what had just been set in motion. It had all started 6 months earlier with a temporary contract. Sheikh Khalid Al-Jamil required a household manager for his sprawling estate outside of Washington, D.C., a base of operations while he finalized a massive philanthropic and investment initiative in the city. Elena, with her impeccable references and quiet demeanor, was deemed the perfect fit. She and Maya were installed in a comfortable stone cottage on the edge of the property, a world away from the main residence with its silent, efficient staff and air of profound, untouchable wealth. Her job was to be a ghost, ensuring perfection without presence. She was to manage schedules, oversee vendors, and guarantee that the sheik's private world ran with the silent, flawless precision of a Swiss watch. For the first month, she barely saw him. She saw his advisors, his security detail, his lawyers. She saw the wake of his power, the way rooms fell silent a full 10 seconds before he entered them. He was an abstraction, a name on a schedule, a list of dietary restrictions. Then came the dinner for the hospital board. It was a critical event, the final charm offensive to secure the naming rights for a new pediatric oncology wing. The guest list was a constellation of old money and new power. Elena was in the background, a shadow with a clipboard, making sure the caterers were seamless. As the main course was about to be served, she passed the staging kitchen and saw one of the chefs adding a flourish of crushed nuts to a sauce. A cold knot formed in her stomach. She scanned the guest file in her memory. Marcus Thorne. Anaphylactic allergy to peanuts. It was noted in 3 separate places. She stepped forward, her voice low but firm. Excuse me, that's sauce. What's in it? The head caterer, a flustered man in a tall white hat, waved her off. It's fine, just a garnish. Is it peanuts? Elena asked, her voice losing its softness. It's a pistachio almond blend, he said dismissively. The file for Mr. Thorne specifies no tree nuts of any kind. You were given that file a week ago. This entire menu was to be nut-free. The man's face paled. He hadn't read the fine print. An argument started, a low, panicked hiss of liability and blame. From across the grand hall, Sheikh Khalid watched the exchange. He saw his staff fluttering, the caterer growing defensive, and Elena, the quiet American manager, standing her ground. She did not raise her voice. She simply held up her tablet, the highlighted allergy warning glowing on the screen. She was not asking. She was informing. A new sauce was prepared. A potential disaster was averted with no one the wiser. Khalid said nothing, but he had seen. What none of his staff knew was that he valued quiet competence over loud loyalty, and he had just seen it in its purest form. A week later, his chief of staff, a man named Karim, approached Elena. He was holding a thick envelope. The sheik was very pleased with the handling of the Thorne dinner, Karim said, his tone professionally pleasant. A bonus for your discretion. Elena looked at the envelope. It was cash, she knew. A thick, untraceable expression of gratitude. The kind of thing that blurred lines, that turned an employee into a confidant, a transaction into an obligation. It was a test. Thank you, Karim, but that's not necessary, she said, her hands remaining at her sides. My compensation is outlined in my contract, and it's more than fair. Please convey my gratitude to the sheik. Karim's practiced smile faltered for a fraction of a second. In his world, no one refused a cash bonus. It was like refusing air. He nodded slowly, taking the envelope back. As you wish, he walked away, but Elena knew this small act of refusal would be reported. She assumed it would be seen as arrogance. What she did not realize was that he had already seen enough performance to last a lifetime. Her simple, professional boundary was more intriguing to him than any amount of flattery. His interest, however, was subtle. He began to create reasons for professional proximity. He requested she sit in on planning meetings for the estate's expansion, ostensibly for her logistical input. During one such meeting, he unrolled a set of blueprints for the new hospital wing he was funding. Architects and designers cooed over the soaring glass atrium and state-of-the-art facilities. They praised his vision, his generosity, his impeccable taste. He let the chorus of approval die down, and then his eyes found Elena, who had been silent in the corner of the room. Mrs. Davis, you have been quiet. Your thoughts. The room's attention swiveled to her. She felt a flush of heat rise in her cheeks. She wasn't supposed to have thoughts. She was supposed to have schedules. She looked at the beautiful, expensive drawings. It's magnificent, she said honestly. But the main entrance to the children's garden, there are 3 steps down from the patio. There's no ramp on this plan. She pointed to a small detail everyone else had overlooked in their admiration of the grand design. A child in a wheelchair couldn't get to the flowers without being carried. The lead architect started to bluster an excuse about aesthetics. Khalid held up a hand, silencing him. He looked at the plans, then back at Elena. He didn't smile, but a new light of appraisal was in his eyes. Fix it, he said to the architect, his tone leaving no room for argument. He had just discovered someone who saw people where others saw plans. Their interactions remained clipped, professional, yet a strange current ran beneath them. He started taking his late afternoon tea in the library, a room whose windows overlooked the path to her cottage. He told himself it was the best light for reading. He would watch as Maya ran across the lawn, her dark hair flying, her laughter carrying on the breeze. He watched Elena walk out to meet her, the stern line of her professional face softening into a mother's smile. He was observing a life that felt more real than his own. One evening, he saw Maya sitting alone on a garden bench, her small shoulders shaking. He hesitated. This was a line he had not crossed. But the sight of her quiet sorrow pulled at something deep within him. He walked over, his footsteps silent on the grass. "Is everything all right, little one?" he asked softly. Maya looked up, her eyes wet. "I miss Grandpa," she whispered. Before he could respond, Elena hurried over, an apology on her lips. "I'm so sorry, sir. She wasn't trying to bother you." "She is no bother," Khalid said, his gaze on the tear-streaked face of the little girl. Elena sat beside her daughter, pulling her into a hug. "Today is the anniversary of my father's death," she explained, her voice quiet. Maya never met him, but she feels his absence. She looked out at the perfectly manicured gardens, a world of curated beauty. "I used to be an illustrator," she said, the words coming out before she could stop them. "My father always believed in my art. After he died, and after Maya's father left, well, providing a stable life became more important than drawing silly pictures." She gave a small, self-deprecating shrug, as if dismissing a childish dream. In that one brief confession, he understood the steel in her spine. She had sacrificed her own passion for her daughter's security. She had remade herself into someone practical, reliable, invisible. And he, a man who could buy anything he desired, felt a pang of something that felt unnervingly like admiration. His advisor, Karim, noticed the shift. He saw the sheik lingering near the gardens, saw him ask Elena's opinion on matters far outside her purview. One afternoon, Karim found the courage to speak. "Sir," he began carefully, "your interest in the American staff, it is becoming noticeable. For a man in your position, appearances are a currency we cannot afford to devalue." "She is an employee," the unspoken words hung between them. "She is not one of us. This can only end badly." Khalid's face was stone. "Her work is exemplary. That is the extent of my interest." "Do you find her work unsatisfactory, Karim?"
"No, sir."
"Of course not. Then we have nothing further to discuss." Karim bowed his head, but the warning had been delivered. The chasm between their worlds was not just a matter of wealth, but of culture, class, and expectation. A chasm no one was meant to cross. That night, Elena was in the main house library long after the rest of the staff had departed, meticulously cataloging a new shipment of rare books. The scent of old paper and lemon polish filled the air. The only sound was the soft slide of a book into its place on the shelf. She felt a prickling on the back of her neck, the distinct sensation of being watched. She turned slowly. He was standing in the grand, arched doorway, half in shadow. He wasn't reading a report or speaking on his phone. He was just watching her. His expression was unreadable, but his stillness was absolute. He did not look away when their eyes met, and in the profound silence of the vast room, Elena felt the professional mask she wore so carefully begin to crack. The air grew thick, charged with all the things their positions forbade them to say. It was she who finally broke the gaze, turning back to the bookshelf, her heart hammering against her ribs. She picked up a book, her hand trembling slightly. She had a contract to finish. She had a daughter to raise. She had no place in whatever world existed in that silent, unnerving stare. The storm arrived without warning, a violent slash of purple and black that tore across the sky. Rain came down in solid, blinding sheets. A crack of lightning, impossibly close, was followed by a deep groan, and then the entire estate was plunged into absolute darkness. The power was gone. With it went the phones, the internet, the hum of the climate control, the invisible infrastructure that made Khalid's world run. Elena and Maya had been in the main house kitchen, packing up a late snack to take back to their cottage. Now, they were trapped. The gravel road to their cottage would be a river of mud. They were stranded in the heart of the beast. The emergency generators should have kicked in. They didn't. Elena found a drawer of utility candles, her movements calm and practiced. Maya, surprisingly, was not scared. To her, it was a grand adventure. But the staff were in a quiet panic. This was an unacceptable failure. Elena, holding a candelabra, went in search of Khalid. She found him in the basement utility room, soaked to the skin, wrestling with the manual override on the main generator. His white thobe was stained with grease, his sleeves rolled up to his elbows. He was shouting at the silent, hulking machine in a low, guttural tone. It was the first time she had ever seen him lose his composure. He was a man used to commanding obedience from people and markets. The defiant silence of a machine was an intolerable offense. It's not going to work, Elena said from the doorway, her voice echoing in the damp space. The candlelight cast long, dancing shadows, making the room look like a cave. He spun around, his eyes blazing. For a second, he looked like a cornered animal. The backup is supposed to be infallible. Nothing is, she replied simply. She set the candelabra down on a metal workbench. Shouting at it won't help. It can wait until morning. The world won't end because the lights are out. Her calmness seemed to drain the anger out of him. He sagged against the generator, wiping a wet hand across his face. I hate this, he admitted, his voice raw. This feeling. Being helpless. The confession hung in the air between them. A man like him was never supposed to feel helpless. This storm, he said, looking past her into the darkness. It reminds me of something. He paused, and then the story came tumbling out, the carefully constructed walls of his reserve crumbling in the dark. It was about the lawsuit, the one that now threatened to ruin him. It was orchestrated by his cousin, Faisal, a man whose ambition was matched only by his bitterness. The foundation of the lawsuit was a fraudulent document related to a joint venture that had collapsed years ago. During that project's final days, Khalid said, his voice low, there was a sandstorm. Just like this. No power, no communications. For 2 days, we were cut off. My partner in the venture was my own brother. Faisal convinced him I had abandoned the deal, that I had deliberately cut him off to save myself. My brother believed him. The pain in his voice was ancient. He sided with Faisal. I lost the project and I lost my brother. Faisal knows this. This storm, this accusation of fraud, he is not just trying to take my company. He is using the memory of my greatest failure to unmake me. He was revealing the wound he kept hidden from the world. Not loneliness, but betrayal. The specific, searing pain of being abandoned by his own blood. Elena listened, the sound of the rain a constant drum against the foundation. She didn't offer pity or platitudes. She offered the only thing she had, the truth of her own scar. My ex-partner, Maya's father, she began, her voice steady in the flickering light, told me my art was a worthless hobby. He called my sketchbooks doodles. When I found out I was pregnant, he gave me an ultimatum. His financial support or my art. He said I couldn't have both. He framed it as a practical choice, but it wasn't. He was making me choose which part of myself to kill. She looked at Khalid, her eyes clear. For a long time, I actually believed him. I packed my art supplies away. I learned that the cruelest people don't just attack you. They find what you love most about yourself, and they try to make you believe it's a liability. They use it to make you feel small and helpless. Her loss answered his. A loss of self-worth mirroring his loss of trust. They were two people from impossibly different worlds who had both been betrayed by the very people who should have protected them. The space between them shrank. The storm outside raged, but in the small, candlelit room, there was a profound stillness. He took a step closer, his shadow engulfing hers. He raised a hand, his fingers tracing the line of her jaw without ever touching her skin. The air crackled with a current far more powerful than the one that had abandoned the house. It was a moment of pure, terrifying possibility. Then, just as quickly, he pulled back. The mask of the sheik slid back into place. You and your daughter should stay in the guest wing tonight, he said, his voice once again formal, controlled. It is safer here than the cottage. He turned and walked away, leaving her alone with the guttering candles and the ghost of what had almost happened. The next morning, the sun was bright, the sky washed clean. The power was restored. The lawyers arrived, their faces grim. The lawsuit was escalating. Faisal was pushing for an immediate injunction, which would freeze Khalid's assets. The legal team was advising him to settle, to cut his losses, to make the problem go away. They were gathered in the formal dining room, the air thick with fear and expensive cologne. Khalid walked in, his composure absolute. He listened to their panic strategies for a full 5 minutes without saying a word. Then he held up a hand. There is one change to our strategy team, he announced, his voice cutting through the nervous chatter. He turned and looked toward the door, where Elena stood, having just brought in a tray of coffee. Elena will be joining these meetings. She will review all documents alongside counsel. The lawyers stared, dumbfounded. His advisor, Kareem, looked horrified. Sir, one of the senior partners stammered, with all due respect, Mrs. Davis she is the household manager. She has no legal background. Khalid's gaze was like ice. She has a clearer eye for detail than anyone in this room, as evidenced by the fact that none of you noticed the forged signature on the primary document was dated on a day I was not even in the country, a detail she pointed out to me this morning from my travel itinerary. She stays. It was not a request. He had not offered her a romantic escape. He had offered her something far more valuable, a seat at the table. In front of his entire world, he had made a public gesture of belief, not in her as a woman, but in her as an equal. He was placing his trust and his empire in her hands. And so they found themselves in court. The snap back to the present was jarring. The hushed, tense atmosphere of the judge's chambers felt a world away from the candlelit intimacy of the storm. Judge Albright, a woman whose face had seen every kind of legal theater, looked at Maya with a weary but not unkind expression. All right, young lady, she said, her voice softer than it had been in the courtroom. You said you have proof. What is it? Faisal's lawyer, a slick man named Miller, objected immediately. Your Honor, this is a farce. The defense is desperate. They are using a child to create a circus. Elena, standing behind her daughter, found her voice. She wasn't the household manager anymore. She was a mother. My daughter will not be called a liar, she said, her tone quiet but unyielding. She has something to show you. Just look at it. The judge held up a hand, silencing Miller. Let's see it, Maya. Maya, utterly unfazed by the powerful adults surrounding her, reached into the small pocket of her dark blue dress. She pulled out a piece of paper, folded into a wobbly square and slightly crumpled. She carefully unfolded it and placed it on the judge's massive mahogany desk. It was a child's drawing, done in crayon. There were two stick figures. One was tall, wearing a long white robe and a red and white checkered headdress, a wide smile drawn on his face. Above him, in wobbly letters, it said, Mar. Khalid, the other figure, was shorter, wearing a suit, with angry eyebrows and a downturned mouth. He was labeled the Shouty Man. In the drawing, the Shouty Man was in a room with shelves of books, handing a piece of paper to another man in a suit. In the background, through a window, the smiling figure of Mr. Khalid was sitting on the grass, reading a book to a little girl with long brown hair. Miller scoffed. This is their proof? A doodle? Maya, the judge said gently, ignoring him. Can you tell me about your drawing? I was in the library, Maya said, her voice clear and certain. I like to draw the books. Mr. Khalid was helping me pick colors. Then the Shouty Man came. Mr. Khalid told me to keep drawing, that he would be right back. But I could hear them. The Shouty Man gave that other man a paper and he whispered, but he was still shouty. He said, make sure his name is on it. Make it look perfect. Khalid, who had been allowed in chambers, stood motionless.
He remembered that day.
Faisal had shown up unannounced, demanding a meeting. Khalid had been with Maya in the garden, helping her with her drawing, and had left her in the library for a few minutes to deal with his cousin. And when was this, Maya? The judge asked, her eyes fixed on the little girl. Do you remember the day? Maya nodded enthusiastically. It was the day before Crazy Hair Day at school. We had to put sparkles in my hair. Mr. Khalid said I looked like a princess from a star. One of Khalid's lawyers, who had been furiously typing on his phone, suddenly looked up, his eyes wide. He whispered to the lead attorney, who then addressed the judge. Your Honor, Crazy Hair Day at our school was on October 12th. The document Mr. Faisal claims Sheikh Khalid signed is dated October 11th. The day of that meeting. The pieces clicked into place with an audible snap. Khalid couldn't have been in his downtown office signing a fraudulent contract because he was at his estate, in his library, within earshot of a 7-year-old girl with a box of crayons. It wasn't hard evidence, not a smoking gun, but it was a crack in the foundation of the lie. It was a reason to look closer, to investigate Faisal, to scrutinize the document that had seemed so perfect. Faisal's lawyer began to bluster, But the judge had heard enough. She looked from the earnest, innocent face of the child to the suddenly pale face of the opposing counsel. "This hearing is adjourned," she announced. "And I am ordering a full forensic analysis of the document in question and an investigation into potential witness tampering and perjury on the part of the plaintiff." Back in the main courtroom, the news spread like wildfire. The case, once a sure thing, had been blown open by a child's drawing. Faisal stood frozen, his smug confidence replaced by a mask of cold fury. His empire of lies was crumbling. Khalid's legal team was jubilant, clapping him on the back, talking excitedly about countersuits and damages. But Khalid wasn't listening. His eyes scanned the chaotic room until they found Elena and Maya, standing near the exit, a small island of stillness in a sea of noise. He walked toward them, parting the crowd of reporters and lawyers as if they were water. He didn't stop to speak to anyone. He walked directly to Elena. In the full glare of the cameras, in front of his family, his rivals, and the world, he did not say a word. He simply reached out and took her hand, lacing his fingers through hers. It was not a gesture of passion, but of solidarity. A public, silent, irreversible declaration. He was choosing her. He was choosing them. As they navigated the media frenzy outside the courthouse, Khalid's stoic advisor, Kareem, fell into step beside Elena. He looked down at Maya, who was now holding Khalid's other hand, skipping slightly to keep up. Kareem looked at Elena, and for the first time, she saw something other than professional duty in his eyes. There was a deep, weary respect. "For years, we have dedicated ourselves to protecting his empire," Kareem said, his voice barely a murmur above the din. "That little girl, she just protected the man." Weeks later, the world had shifted. The charges against Khalid were dropped. Faisal was entangled in a web of investigations that would likely consume him. The storm had passed. But the real resolution didn't happen in a boardroom or a press conference. It happened on a sunny Tuesday afternoon in a small, cluttered art supply store in a quiet suburban town. Khalid stood patiently, holding a wire basket, while Maya gravely considered the relative merits of purple versus pink glitter glue. Elena stood nearby, a sketchbook open on her lap, a pencil moving in swift, confident strokes. She was drawing again. She was drawing a picture of a little girl and a tall man laughing as they debated the properties of glitter. Back at the estate, in Khalid's grand, wood-paneled study, a new piece of art had been added to the collection. It was not a priceless painting or an ancient sculpture. It was a child's crayon drawing, professionally framed in simple, elegant wood. It hung in the place of honor, right above the antique mahogany desk where billion-dollar deals were made. In the end, the billionaire's most valuable asset was not held in a Swiss vault or a portfolio of stocks. It was a 7-year-old's drawing, a crumpled piece of paper that had served as evidence not of his innocence, but of his humanity.